I am staring at something that stopped me cold. 1,137 soldiers. That is how many Allied troops died in Afghanistan after September 11th, 2001. British soldiers, Canadian soldiers, German, French, Italian, Polish, Danish, Spanish, Australian troops. They died because America invoked NATO Article 5 for the first time in history. And yesterday, at Davos, the President of the United States stood in front of the world and basically spat on their graves. This is my analysis of what just happened. I could be wrong about some of this, but I don't think I am. I spent the last 3 days reading through over 1,200 comments from people reacting to Trump's Davos appearance, and what emerged is something I wasn't expecting. This isn't just about one disastrous speech. This is about watching America's global standing collapse in real time, and I'm not sure most Americans understand what we just lost. Let me back up for a second because the details matter here. Trump went to Davos, Switzerland, the World Economic Forum. This is where global leaders, business titans, finance ministers gather every year. It is basically the Super Bowl of international diplomacy and economic policy. And Trump showed up looking weak, sounding incoherent, and acting like he was still at a MAGA rally in Michigan instead of representing America on the world stage. Here is what really gets me. About 48% of the comments I analyzed came from non-Americans, Danish citizens, Canadians, Germans, British veterans, and the emotion in those comments wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was disappointment mixed with finality. It was the sound of former allies closing the door. One Danish commenter wrote something that I can just stop thinking about. They said their pension fund made a strategic decision to divest from American Treasury bonds, got the story out to news channels, and watched as Trump's team panicked and backed down from threatening Denmark. They weren't celebrating. They were just noting, almost sadly, that this is what it's come to. Denmark, a country of 5.9 million people, called America's bluff, and we blinked. Let me explain why that matters more than you might think. The United States economy runs on something called the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Countries around the world buy our treasury bonds because historically America has been seen as the safest investment on the planet, more stable than gold, more reliable than any other currency. That trust is what allows us to finance our debt, fund our military, maintain our infrastructure. It's not just about money, it's about global confidence in American stability. And Trump is systematically destroying that confidence. I found something in the comments that I think a lot of mainstream analysis is missing. Around 38% of commenters, including several who identified as financial professionals, pointed to the same pattern. They were not just worried about Trump's rhetoric, they were tracking actual market movements, bond sell-offs, currency hedging, international investors quietly shifting away from dollar-denominated assets. This isn't a hypothetical doomsaying. This is money moving in real time. One commenter who said they work in international finance wrote that clients are asking questions they've never asked before. Questions like, can we trust American contract law if the president threatens to seize Greenland? If Trump casually insults allies who lost soldiers defending America, what does that mean for treaty obligations? If he lies about crowd sizes and weather patterns, why would we trust him with our retirement funds? These are not abstract concerns. These are the conversations happening in boardrooms in Tokyo, Frankfurt, London, Singapore right now. But here's where it gets really disturbing, and this is what nobody is talking about. About 62% of comments expressed genuine confusion about Trump's mental state at Davos. Not political disagreement, medical concern, people describing him as slurring words, losing his train of thought, looking physically unwell, swollen ankles, black spots on his hands, the weird sucking sound he makes constantly. I am not a doctor. I can diagnose anyone. But what I can tell you is that international observers are watching an American president appear to be in cognitive decline, and they remaking strategic decisions based on that observation. You know what's crazy about this? Trump went to Davos presumably to reassure global markets and leaders. That was the whole point. Instead, he spent his time ranting about protesters in Minnesota, lying about Somalia being mentioned in the Bible, insulting the very allies whose soldiers died in our war, and generally behaving like someone who has no idea where he is or what's expected of him. The audience at Davos wasn't MAGA rally attendees. These were sophisticated international business leaders, finance ministers, economists, people who can read a balance sheet and understand geopolitical risk. And Trump stood up there and delivered the same rambling, incoherent, self-aggrandizing nonsense he gives to his base. He couldn't read the room. He didn't even try. One commenter made an observation that really stuck with me. They said Trump is so stuck in his address MAGA mode that he has lost the ability to function in any other context. He can to modulate, he can to adapt, he can to rise to the moment. And when you re-representing America on the global stage, that is not just embarrassing, it is dangerous. Now let me tell you what I discovered when I started connecting the dots between the economic comments and the geopolitical ones. Remember those 1,137 Allied soldiers who died in Afghanistan? They didn't die defending Denmark or Canada or Germany. They died because NATO Article 5 says an attack on one ally is an attack on all. After 9/11, America invoked that article, and our allies responded. British troops, Canadian troops, German, French, Italian, Polish, Danish troops. They came because that's what the alliance means. And Trump stood at Davos and essentially said their sacrifice was worthless because it was America's war, not theirs. I want you to understand what just happened there. Trump didn't just insult some politicians. He dishonored the war dead of our closest allies. He told the families of soldiers who died defending America that their sons and daughters were suckers for showing up. The comments from European veterans were absolutely gutting. One person who identified as a former sergeant major in the German Armed Forces, Parachute Regiment 263, wrote a post that I think every American needs to read. They laid out the names: British, Canadian, German, French, Italian, Polish, Danish, Spanish, Australian, Georgian, Romanian, Dutch soldiers. They wrote that these men and women honored a commitment that military service isn't measured by whose war it was, but by duty, loyalty, and sacrifice. And then they said something that gave me chills. They said political statements that diminish or dismiss these sacrifices are disrespectful and incompatible with the reality of military alliance warfare. That Allied blood was shed in good faith and deserves to be remembered as such. That commenter ended by saying, "We remember not out of habit, we remember out of respect. And we speak up when that respect is denied." Here is what I think both sides are missing in all of this. The mega commenters, about 22% of the total, kept saying things like Trump is telling the truth, we can disagree with him about Biden's border policy, these allies are taking advantage of us. And look, I understand the frustration with feeling like America has been taken advantage of. I get the resentment about funding NATO while European countries underspend on defense. Those are legitimate policy debates. But that's not what this is about. This is about a sitting president going to an international forum and behaving so erratically, so disrespectfully, so incompetently that he is actively harming American interests in real time. You can want better trade deals and still recognize that insulting dead Allied soldiers is insane. You can want allies to pay more for defense and still understand that threatening to annex Greenland makes us look like a rogue state. The most compelling case for defending Trump's Davos performance is probably this. He is being authentic, he is challenging the globalist establishment, he is fighting for American workers against elites who look down on them. I actually think there is something to that. The Davos crowd does represent a certain insular global elite. There are legitimate criticisms of how international economic policy has failed working people. But Trump didn't make those arguments effectively. He just ranted incoherently, lied repeatedly, and embarrassed the country. Being anti-establishment doesn't mean you have to be incompetent. You can challenge the status quo without disgracing yourself. And here's why I'm convinced this matters more than just one bad speech. I found a pattern in the international comments that I think represents a fundamental shift. Allied nations aren't just upset, they were adapting. They were making strategic decisions based on the assumption that America under Trump is unreliable. Denmark is moving pension funds. European nations are accelerating plans for independent defense capabilities. Asian allies are hedging their bets with China. Canada is exploring trade relationships that don't depend on the U.S. This isn't reversible with one good speech later. Trust, once broken, takes decades to rebuild. And Trump is breaking trust that took 75 years to build. One Canadian commenter wrote something that perfectly captures what I am seeing. They said to the surprise of absolutely nobody but the cognitively impaired, nobody likes being stabbed in the back. The U.S. is now reaping what it has sown and will be all the poorer for it. That's not triumphant. That's sad. That's a former ally watching a friendship die and mourning it. Let me connect this back to the economic stuff because this is where it gets really scary. Multiple commenters pointed out that countries are selling U.S. Treasury bonds, not slowly, not hypothetically, right now. And we rebuying them back to finance our own debt. That's a death spiral. When you have to buy your own debt because nobody else wants it, you're in serious trouble. The housing market is showing the same pattern. Feedback loop leading to collapse. New generations locked out, older generations refusing to sell at a loss, rent prices exploding. It's a powder keg. And on top of all of this, we have a president who responds to economic anxiety by threatening allies, lying about basic facts, and pursuing policies that accelerate the crisis. Tariffs that act as a 55% tax on American consumers, trade wars that destroy markets for American goods, immigration crackdowns that devastate industries that depend on that labor. It's almost like he is trying to crash everything on purpose. Several commenters actually suggested exactly that theory. They said Trump wants to be the fall guy. He is doing this deliberately to destroy the system. I don't think that's right. I think that gives him too much credit for strategic thinking. What I see is a man in serious cognitive decline, surrounded by sycophants who tell him the truth, operating on instinct and grievance with no understanding of consequences. But you know what? The result is the same either way. Whether Trump is deliberately sabotaging America or just too incompetent to prevent it, we are still headed for the same cliff. Here's what terrifies me most. I read through hundreds of comments from Trump supporters, and the most common theme was that none of this matters because the media is lying, because liberals are overreacting, because Trump is playing four-dimensional chess that we too stupid to understand. And I want to be really clear about this. I am not saying everyone who voted for Trump is stupid. I am not saying there weren't legitimate reasons to want change. I am not even saying that some of the establishment criticism isn't valid. But at some point, you have to be willing to look at evidence and adjust your position. At some point, you have to be able to say, this isn't working, this is making things worse, we need to change course. And I am not seeing that willingness. I am seeing doubling down. I am seeing conspiracy theories to explain away every failure. I am seeing attacks on anyone who points out problems as being deep state or fake news or traitors. That's not politics. That's a cult. And cults don't end well. One commenter wrote that those titans of finance at Davos could stop Trump in his tracks. They have the power, but so far they're okay with letting him run amok as long as they were making money hand over fist. I think that's exactly right. The wealthy and powerful will tolerate almost anything as long as their portfolios are growing. But the problem is, this can last. You can run an economy on confidence, and confidence is evaporating. When the crash comes, and I believe it's coming, those titans will be fine. They'll have hedged their bets, moved their money offshore, diversified into assets that hold value. It's everyone else who is going to get crushed. Working people, retirees, anyone whose wealth is tied up in their home or their 401k or their small business. The big companies will survive. The little people will pay. That's always how it works. So where does this leave us? I am looking at comment after comment from Americans saying things like, we need a general strike, we need to follow Minneapolis' lead, we can do another 3 years of this stupidity. And then I am looking at comments from non-Americans saying they hope America corrects course before we become mortal enemies, but they are not counting on it. That is the world we are living in now. Our former allies are making contingency plans that assume American reliability is gone. Our adversaries are emboldened, our economy is showing stress fractures. And our president is at Davos, sucking his spit every few seconds, ranting about Somalia, lying about basic facts, insulting the war debt of our allies. I want to be wrong about this. I genuinely do. Maybe I'm seeing patterns that aren't there. Maybe this is all going to work out fine and I'll look like an alarmist idiot, but I don't think so. I think we rewatching something that historians are going to study for decades, the collapse of American hegemony, the end of the post-World War II international order, the moment when the world as most powerful nation decided to elect a con man in obvious cognitive decline and let him destroy everything our grandparents built. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, Half the country doesn't even see it happening. They think this is fine. They think this is making America great again. They think insulting allies and lying constantly and behaving like a demented game show host is somehow owning the libs and restoring American greatness. It's not. It's national suicide. And we are doing it voluntarily. One commenter wrote that if Trump is assassinated, they believe a Republican will pull the trigger. I don't want that. I don't want political violence. I don't want martyrdom that would make everything worse. What I want is for enough people to wake up and demand better before it's too late. But I'm running out of hope that's going to happen. Look, I know this is heavy. I know it's depressing. I know some of you are thinking I am being hysterical or partisan or just another Trump hater who can accept the election results. And maybe you rewrite. Maybe I am wrong about all of this. But answer me this. When you watch Trump at Davos, do you see a competent leader representing American interests effectively? When you hear him insult soldiers who died defending us, does that make you proud? When you watch allies distance themselves and adversaries grow bolder, does that feel like winning? Because if it does, then we fundamentally disagree about what America should be. And I don't know how to bridge that gap. What I do know is this. We can afford another 3 years of this. We can afford the economic damage. We can afford the international isolation. We can afford the democratic backsliding. We can afford a president in cognitive decline making life and death decisions. So what do? First, we tell the truth. We stop pretending this is normal. We stop making excuses. We call it what it is, a national emergency. Second, we organize general strikes, protests, civil disobedience if necessary. Make it politically impossible for enablers to keep supporting this. Third, we build alternatives. Support independent media. Support candidates who will actually fight back. Support international partnerships that can survive this administration. Fourth, we prepare. If you can, diversify your assets. Build community networks. Depend on systems that might collapse. And fifth, we remember. We document everything. We make sure history records what happened here, who enabled it, who resisted it, who told the truth, because this matters. This moment matters, not just for America, but for the world. Those 1,137 Allied soldiers who died in Afghanistan, they believed in something. They believed that democratic nations standing together could defeat terrorism and tyranny. They believed in the alliance. They believed in America. And we owe it to them, to their families, to everyone who still believes in what America could be to not let this stand. I'm going to keep speaking up. I'm going to keep pointing out the lies, the failures, the dangers, even when it's exhausting, even when it feels hopeless, because the alternative is complicity, and I want to do that. You don't have to agree with everything I've said. You don't have to share my politics, but I am asking you to at least consider the possibility that this is real, that the damage is real, that the danger is real. And if you see it too, if you are as scared as I am, then do something. Anything. Call your representatives, show up to protests, talk to your neighbors, vote in every election, support journalism that holds power accountable, because right now, today, we are watching American power and credibility collapse in real time. And once it is gone, we're not getting it back. That is what happened at Davos. That is what those 1,200 comments revealed. That is what keeps me up at night. And that is why I am still fighting, even when it feels futile, even when I am exhausted, because the alternative is surrender, and I am not ready.